But we have to get out for the midterms. Promise me, you gotta get out for the Don't be complacent.
I've got a broader message, and it's a simple message. Vote.
Midterm elections in America. Next month, Americans will head to the ballot box to vote in what is seen as a pivotal midterm election. Voters will send a message to President Trump, either one of support or a demand for change. Today on Plugged In, we will show you what's at stake, not just here in the United States, but also for the rest of the world. Hello and welcome to Plugged In. I'm Jim Malone, filling in this week for Greta Van Susteren, who's on assignment. On today's show, former chairman of the Republican National Committee and the former lieutenant governor of Maryland, Michael Steele, gives us the GOP's plan for the November midterms. Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger, U.S. representative from the state of Maryland, will tell us about the Democrats' strategy to take back control of the House of Representatives. And VOA News reporters from around the world will give us their global perspective on the U.S. midterm elections. We are live on Facebook at Voice of America, and we want your comments and questions. In 5 weeks, U.S. voters will head to the polls to elect a new Congress. The outcome will have a profound impact on the next 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency. Now, intensity is building for the November 6th election, especially among opposition Democrats seeking to win back control of the House of Representatives and perhaps even the Senate. But the polarizing battle over Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh seems to be mobilizing voters in both political parties, and VOA's Mil Arcega has the latest.
President Trump on the campaign trail in West Virginia, whipping up support for his embattled Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh.
I'm not running, but I'm really running. That's why I'm all over the place fighting for great candidates. You see what's going on. You see this horrible, horrible, radical group of Democrats. You see it happening right now.
The confirmation battle intensified even more after last week's riveting testimony by Kavanaugh accuser Christine Blasey Ford and the judge's defiant denial.
Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details.
This confirmation process has become a national disgrace. You have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy.
Amid the furor over Kavanaugh, Trump is making a furious push around the country to help Republicans hold their narrow majority in the Senate.
Promise me, you gotta get out for the Don't be complacent. You gotta get out for the midterm. You gotta vote.
But Democrats have some star power of their own, determined to boost turnout, including Trump's predecessor, Barack Obama.
They say, well, I'm going to wait until the presidential election. This one is actually more important. This is actually more important than any election that we've seen in a long time.
Trump will be the central figure in next month's election, likely motivating both sides, says John Fortier.
He has been out there endorsing people, working in a way that many thought when he was elected he would not be really within the Republican Party or working with other candidates. He's fully in, for better or worse, and will certainly help some candidates in Republican places, but may turn off people in others.
Democrats have been turning out in big numbers in special elections and in primaries, a positive sign for November, says Jim Kessler.
I expect Democrats to take the House. I now even think they might take the Senate, even though the map is so difficult out there. The excitement among Democratic voters is very, very high. Republican voters are turning out too, but Democratic voters are really turning out.
And we will make America great again. Thank you, West Virginia. Thank you.
Trump is expected to stay busy on the campaign trail right up until Election Day, hoping to blunt a Democratic surge that could severely limit his presidency.
Historically, the party that holds the White House loses congressional seats in midterm elections. But there have been exceptions. In the 2002 midterms, Republicans actually gained seats with President George W. Bush in the White House. 2 years later, Bush won re-election and famously announced that he had earned political capital and that he intended to use it. This year, Republicans are defending their House and Senate majorities amid predictions from some experts of what's known as a blue wave that could sweep Democrats back into power on Capitol Hill. Here to discuss the Republican outlook for the 2018 midterms is Michael Steele, former Republican National Committee chairman and host of his weekly podcast, Man of Steel. Welcome.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
I want to ask you what the frame of mind right now among Republicans is as we look ahead to the November voting.
Publicly, what you heard the president say, get out and vote, let's not sit on our laurels. We have a lot of work to do. Privately, they are very nervous. I would even say somewhat scared about what this election portends for their majority, certainly in the House. Which is beyond in play. I mean, your lead-in was right on point in terms of the dynamics and what's going on. But what is not really focused on, and is the undercard here, is the fact that independent voters who typically swing towards Republicans in these elections. That's how Republicans typically hold majorities or gain their majorities, particularly in areas where Democrats seem to be strong. Those independent voters are now swinging towards the Democratic Party. And that is the problem because it changes the numbers game for Republicans, even in states where you would think, and we've seen it already, where the Republican stronghold was such that they would hold control, right. They lose control because of those independent voters.
Why are those independents shifting, do you think?
Because this election is a referendum on the president, as most, if not all, midterms are. But this is different. This is seeing the president on the ballot in a way that we typically don't. Usually it's about their policies or some global issue, as we saw in the Bush terms with the war, for example, or the economy that we saw in the 2008 cycle. This is about the president. It's personal because the president has made it personal because that's how he does things. It's all about him. All right, fine. You want it to be about you? Well, every candidate on the ballot now has to account for your behavior, has to account for your tweets. And that's where you see the energy from Democrats, where you see, quite frankly, a rather flat line among Republicans because they support the guys like, this is our guy. We don't have to go out. He's not on the ballot. Why do I have to go out? Right. Which is why you see them now stumping so hard because they know if that base does not turn out, the numbers could be a lot worse.
I mean, you were running the party in a time when I think you guys made tremendous inroads into the Obama administration, 2010 midterms. You're on sort of looking at it from the other side now. Do you see the same type of wave building this year? Yeah,
I do. And it's unfortunate because, the effort that we put in to take the House, to build the House that we now have, to watch folks over the last 8 years basically tear up the floorboards and knock out the windows is difficult. But this is the consequence of a lack of governing, the failure on health care, the failure really in the battles that we've seen on a number of other issues between and among Republicans has been one of those wedges that has sort of dampened the base support.
About 30 seconds left, but if Democrats do take one or both chambers back in November, what's the outlook for governing for the next 2 years?
The outlook for governing is going to be pretty much the way we saw it in the Obama years. But here's the difference I think a lot of Republicans don't really account for, and that is Donald Trump doesn't care who's sitting across the table from him. It could be a Democrat, it could be a Republican, it could be Mickey Mouse. He'll do a deal with whomever's there. So it doesn't matter, and we've already seen him throw Republicans under the bus before. It's not hard for him.
Michael Steele, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. This November, the U.S. House of Representatives is likely to welcome its first 2 Muslim American women as lawmakers. They would join Indiana Congressman Andre Carson as members of Congress, representing an often misunderstood and marginalized faith. As VOA's Kane Faribaugh reports, these candidates represent the changing face of the U.S. Congress.
It started in Michigan.
But I want to thank all of you so much. This is a lot of hard work. Did you win? Yes.
And continued in Minnesota.
Because we're going to Washington, everyone!
And neither Ilhan Omar nor Rashida Tlaib believe it will end in Washington, D.C.
This win would mean so much more than just a seat in Congress.
It is a powerful message.
A message primary election voters in their districts delivered in August, that a Muslim American woman is ready to represent them in Congress, even at a time of increased hostility towards their faith.
I had one of my campaign managers leave a nonprofit organization. The woman said, you know, really sorry to see you leave. And Diana said, oh, don't worry about me. I'm going to actually go work for the first Muslim woman ever elected in the Michigan legislature. I'm super excited. And she said, they're in our government.
And to see, you know, these women potentially elected to the Congress of the United States is a huge statement.
Alvin Tillery says while the election wins of both women are not surprising in the liberal districts they represent, they are part of a new wave of immigration. Muslims represent just over 1% of the U.S. population, but it is the fastest growing religion on earth. The Pew Research Center says by 2040, Islam will be the second largest religion in the U.S., and Omar and Tlaib represent the face of that changing population.
This is the quintessentially American story. It's the story of, you know, Irish immigrants and Italian immigrants, Polish immigrants. It's just playing out with a different religion and ethnicities, and that's what America's supposed to be about.
Tlaib, the daughter of Palestinian immigrants, was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Omar was born in Somalia, but fled to a refugee camp in Kenya before joining the large Somali community in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Welcome to the House of Representatives.
While both come from families shaped by war and have faced hostility toward their religion on both sides of the political aisle, they represent a progressive wing of the Democratic Party that hopes to take control of the U.S. House in the November midterm elections. Contests both women still have to win. Tlaib is running unopposed, and while Omar faces opposition from a Republican challenger, she is likely to win. But Tillery says their biggest challenge isn't winning elections, it's meeting the expectations of voters and the Muslim American community. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Chicago, Illinois.
As we mentioned earlier, the opposition party tends to do well in U.S. midterm elections, and Democrats are confident that they will gain seats next month, especially in the House of Representatives. Democrats need to gain 23 seats to claim the majority, a net pickup of 2 seats to win back control of the Senate. But even as Democrats project optimism about this year's elections, questions remain as to whether the party can muster enough support to shift the balance of power in Washington, especially after many Democrats were shocked by Donald Trump's presidential victory 2 years ago. And we're going to get to the Democratic point of view in a minute, but for right now I want to get an international perspective on the U.S. midterm elections. Each year parliamentary elections take place around the world. The results may or may not have an impact. Joining me to discuss the international impact of the midterms around the world, 2 of my VOA colleagues, Gilberto Cabrera from VOA's Latin American service and Haroon Maruf of VOA Africa. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Gilberto, what kind of interest level is there in Latin America on this election?
Well, there is interest, Jim, in the sense that our 62+ million viewers are mostly worried about immigration and the wall. Basically, as we all know, President Trump promised to build a wall, and he said Mexico would pay for it. That clearly never happened. However, there is interest in the sense that if the Democrats were to take control of at least one of the houses of Congress, mostly the House, not the Senate, perhaps, the chances of the wall being built are probably even less than they are now.
What about trade? We saw this recent talk of U.S., Mexico, Canada, a redo of the NAFTA. Is that generating interest?
It is, in the sense, especially among Mexicans, in the sense that it's a big trade deal. As far as the rest of Latin America or South America and Central America, there is interest as well, because trade with China is sort of becoming more and more frequent. Especially certain countries in Central America are shifting away from trading with other partners and focusing on China, and China is happy to do that.
Haroon Maruf from our Somali service. What's the view, a broader view in Africa about this election? Is there much interest in terms of following what's going on?
Yes, there is a lot of interest. The views of Somalis back home with regard to U.S. elections affected by two main policies. One is the immigration, in particular the travel ban. Somalia is affected by the travel ban issued by President Trump. And a lot of people are uneasy and they're inclined towards the Democrats to win and at least get some power to balance the power, in that case, it's affecting a lot of Somalis who are refugees in Kenya, who are getting refugee resettlement in the United States. That has also energized, as we have seen the report earlier, the Somalis in the diaspora, who many of them have been refugees, and we are expecting for the first time a Somali descent, a person of Somali origin to join.
But briefly on security, I mean, there's concern about Al-Shabaab, how the U.S. is dealing with that. There is some support for, in some ways, the U.S. approach.
Yeah, that is the other main aspect. Elites and people in the government have been very happy with the cooperation that they were getting from the Trump administration. Trump has last year designated parts of Somalia, especially in areas controlled by Al-Shabaab, as war zone. That means the level of attacks against Al-Shabaab has increased.
Let me come back to Gil briefly. Just the role, you know, since the Obama administration, how the U.S. is perceived in the world. I mean, has that changed in the last 2 years here?
In Latin America, it has. To an extent, you know, there's folks who favor the type of government we have now, the White House, President Trump, his ideas. However, for the most part, it seems to me, for what I hear, people see him as a bit of a curiosity and are a little bit scared of what may happen.
Right. Well, we're going to be interested to check back with both of you later on and see how you look at the results once November comes. Thanks, both of you, so much for joining us on the program today. Well, we talked earlier about the Democrats. They have their own strategies in terms of the midterm elections and where they think the country is heading, especially in their bid to try to take over the House of Representatives in November. I spoke with veteran Democratic Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger of Maryland about the changes or the challenges that the Democratic Party faces in this year's midterm election.
The Democrats are a very diverse party. So we have a lot of different people that are involved in different issues and might not agree. I happen to be more of a moderate Democrat. I'm on the Appropriations Defense Appropriations. I used to specialize in intelligence and national security. Then you have other people in the Democratic Party who are very far left, and you know they have certain issues too. And what we're trying to do as Democrats in this election is bring all Democrats together and focus on the basic issues in this election. And those issues are really, they're not as much about Russia and China and Al-Qaeda, even though people are concerned and upset about some of those issues. They're more concerned with what's happening domestically in our country.
I want to ask you about the focus of the party agenda. There's a lot of talk this year. Is the party simply running against President Donald Trump, trying to make it a referendum on the president? Or does the party have an agenda to offer the American people an alternative view of government?
It's just not about Trump. I think those of us who would like to get the House back, I think the media are doing a good job in pointing out the issues with respect to Trump. I think really what we're trying to do as Democrats to bring all Democrats together is say the middle class is still hurting. The economy is doing well, but people aren't making money. We're focusing on the issue of minimum wage to try to raise that. When Bill Clinton was president, he raised minimum wage. The economy went up, and the reason is when people get more money in their pocket, middle class, they spend it, and the economy does well. And so, you know, that's one issue that we're really focused on. You've got to look at education. I mean, education is so important, and then healthcare, and those are the big issues. And what really bothers me, and I think our party generally, is that it seems that the policies of this president, it's not about helping people. If you want to be an elected official, you want to be in office, and you want to make a difference to help people. But when you're trying to do away with Obamacare without even a plan to fix it, so all of a sudden, if this continues on, you know, he was able in his tax cut to allow the younger generation to get out of Obamacare. If that happens, that means there'll be less money. That means senior citizens will really be in trouble. Their costs not only will go up, and they're on fixed incomes, but issues like pre-existing conditions. If you're treated for a heart attack and then you have cancer, you're in trouble. And so why do we want to hurt people and American citizens? We want them to do well.
So much of the party energy, though, seems animated at opposing the president and making it a vote of confidence, so to speak, if you look around the world when you have a parliamentary system. As Democrats, how do you try to shift that focus to the agenda you want to implement?
Because you continue to talk about issues, and we've tried not to. Look, there's no question. This president is a narcissistic individual, and he loves himself, as we know, and he talks about the issues that affect him. It was almost an embarrassment when he was telling the United Nations, "I'm the best president we've ever had." And they started to laugh at him. And he didn't understand that. But I don't bring that up because I thought it was funny. But really, it was really serious because, we're losing our relationships throughout the world, especially Europe. We were considered to be the premier country. The other countries would come to us for business, for protection, for national security, for military. And that's falling away because of some of the policies. So, but I think what we're trying to do, and we should as Democrats, focus on what people care about. Why do people vote? They vote based on their community, their family. They want jobs to take care of themselves and their family. And in the end, they probably care more about that than all the other issues that I deal with in national security, the nuclear threat, the Russia-China threat, all these issues.
And our thanks to Democratic Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger of Maryland for that interview. Well, trade, tariffs, election tampering, topics that continue to linger in the minds of voters here in the United States and that could help sway the outcome of the midterm elections next month. Now, joining me more with our international perspective, some VOA colleagues, I'm happy to welcome Peggy Chang of VOA's Mandarin service and Igor Tianenko from VOA's Russian service. My thanks to both of you for being here. Peggy, let me begin with you. Interesting relationship between the Trump administration and China we've seen so far. Does China have a stake in this election? Are they kind of keeping an eye on it?
I would say that in the past, our audience in China do not pay as much attention to midterm elections as they do presidential elections, but this year they are paying attention because of the rising tensions between U.S. and China due to trade disputes and other issues. We know that U.S. farmers, especially soybean, corn, dairy, pork producers, they're bearing the brunt of the trade war, and our audience wants to see whether the midterm election results in those states as hardest hit by the tariffs, are those voters still support President Trump and the Republican candidates? We know a lot of these farmers and ranchers, they supported President Trump in the 2016 election.
Yeah, there's been such a buildup of the market share with China for these goods, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Igor, let me ask you about Russia. I mean, much interest in Russia on the midterms this year?
Jim, good to be with you. I have to echo in a way what Peggy had to say. An average Russian voter, an average Russian citizen does not usually sit, being glued to his TV or computer screen in the search of, what are the names of congressmen that are up for the re-election. Just like a good analogy would be, how many, Russian MPs do you know? And the answer is probably not many, or if any, and it's understandable. Now, a lot has changed since the year of 2016, ever since Donald Trump has been elected. As Kellyanne Conway, the counselor to the president, said herself, ever since it's been all Russia, 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 and she's right in a way. American media, mainstream media, has focused a lot on covering, all these scandals that the Trump administration immersed itself in with regards to Russia, and it's finding a reflection in the Russian media coverage. So Russian citizens do know what the American media is covering. They do know what's being discussed in Washington, and of course they're concerned what's going to happen in these midterm elections in general, because they know that new sanctions might be imposed, and if that happens, obviously their life might be changed, at least economically.
Peggy, in terms of China, say the Chinese government, there's this yin and yang in terms of dealing with the president, the Trump administration on trade. Is there a possibility of an agreement? Do you sense that the Chinese government has a particular outcome in mind that they would prefer for the election? Do they want a strengthened Donald Trump or one who may be challenged by a strengthened Democratic opposition?
I think a lot of analysts said that the Chinese government is trying to hurt President Trump politically by hurting his supporters economically through trade. And from a lot of analysts' reports saying that it's the Chinese government is conducting a more of a long-term look and of a long-term strategy to have an influence campaign in the U.S. They don't necessarily, in the long run, favor any party. They're very patient, so the influence campaign may last many years and you don't see the result. It's a little bit different from what we think about the Russian meddling of the 2016 election.
Well, speaking of the Russian meddling, I'm glad you brought that up, because even though a lot of Russians may not know a lot about the specifics, we know there were certain sectors of the government that were very interested, at least in the last election. Are we expecting to see that again? I mean, U.S. intelligence officials are already talking about additional Russian meddling in this year's election.
Yeah, well, as you know, 17 U.S. intel agencies unanimously said that the interference did take place in the year of 2016, and probably the years preceding to that, we just were not quite aware of that. Now, the extent of that interference is still, the jury is still out on there, and I'm not sure if we'll ever know. The fact of the matter is, as we know from the open sources, just like myself, there are reports that, excuse me, that there is continued interference that is happening these days. Again, the extent of which we probably don't know, and it's all in classified documents that are, very few pairs of eyes that are reading now. But the bigger question is what the U.S. is doing. I know that now, currently, there are hearings ongoing on the Capitol Hill. They started just about an hour ago on that question.
What about President Putin? Does he have an interest in seeing Donald Trump strengthened from the elections? Or, I mean, there seems to be a relationship there that has been budding, and I just wonder how the Kremlin leadership might look at it.
I think it's an excellent question in a way that there will be a split among analysts in answering that question for one simple reason. Donald Trump has won, yes, and that's what it looks like. That's what Putin wanted, but it looks like also that it looks like Putin has shot himself in the foot with that, because the amount of sanctions and amount of scrutiny that is dedicated to Russia, including Russia's interference and meddling into U.S. affairs, has been magnified, quadrupled, by a number of times. So we don't know what's in the minds of the Kremlin. It looks like Mr. Trump refuses to criticize Putin for whatever reason, still again unknown. So it's very hard to say who they would prefer to be in the Oval Office next.
Peggy, last word to you. Just a few seconds left, but I mean, do you think that China will have a little more interest in this midterm, given that it is seen here in this country as a referendum on President Trump?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the Chinese government is paying close attention to it, and so are their Chinese audience.
Thank you both so much. Peggy from Mandarin, Igor from Russian. Great to have you with us. Well, that's all the time we have for today. You can now hear podcasts of Plugged In on voanews.com/Greta. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice of America. You can also like Greta's Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta. And follow Greta on Twitter @Greta. Thanks for being plugged in.